Hey, what's up? I'm Jason Howell, and I am here with the Huawei Ascend Mate2 4G LTE. Now, Huawei is a Chinese manufacturer of hardware devices, and in the States, they kind of, I hesitate to say they have a bad rap, but they're more known for low to mid-range devices, and carriers haven't really kind of taken hold, brought them into the fold as they have with other manufacturers like HTC and Samsung that we're used to seeing. But Huawei really wants to break through in the US, and this is the Ascend Mate2, which is kind of their attempt to do so. You're not going to find it on a carrier, actually. You're going to find it through their site if you go to gethuawei.com. They have pre-orders through June 22nd, and if you pre-order within that time, you actually get a free case and a $50 prepaid SIM card along with the device. You can tell it's a pretty large device, so let's take a look at the specs real quick. It has a 6.1-inch IPS LCD display showing 720p video. It has a quad-core 1.6 gigahertz Snapdragon 400 processor. So it's not an 800. It's a little bit, they had to kind of peel back the specs a little bit to get the really competitive price, which I'll talk about in a second. With 2 gigs of RAM and 16 gigs of internal storage. If you want to increase that, you can. There's a micro SD card slot in the back. Right here, you can see you've got your slot as well as your SIM card slot. This battery, this is a big differentiator for this phone. It's a 3,900 milliamp hour battery. It's non-removable, although you could probably get it off if you had a tiny little piece of screwdriver, tiny little screwdriver to pry it off. But at 3,900 milliamp hours, you're probably not going to need to remove this battery. And if you're really impressed with the battery capability, you can actually plug in an optional accessory into the bottom and plug it into another phone that needs a battery charge. And this device will actually charge that phone's battery. Really super cool stuff. It has an LTE antenna for GSM CDMA Plus here in the States, so you're gonna be able to run it on T-Mobile, on Sprint. You're not gonna be able to run this on the Verizon network. It's running 4.3 Jelly Bean. That is not KitKat, and they don't know when it's going to get upgraded to KitKat, so it's probably something to keep in mind. It has a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera, and then on the front you have a 5 megapixel front-facing camera, which is definitely a step up from most front-facing cameras. And just as a general kind of bonus, it does support 802.11ac Wi-Fi, so that's pretty cool. Now it's sold unlocked, and I mentioned the price earlier being a competitive price. It's $299 unlocked. That's unsubsidized. So you go to their site, you're dropping $299 for this device, this phablet, essentially. And that's an incredibly low cost for this kind of hardware. The design, I'm pretty happy with the design, to be honest. It's plastic, make no qualms about it. So if you don't like plastic, you might want to reconsider. But it's not a flimsy style plastic. It actually feels very firm in the hand. It's not, not quite as solid as, say, HTC devices, but definitely feels better than a lot of the Samsung devices out there. A little bit heavy, but at a 6.1-inch device, you're probably going to get a little bit of extra weight there. And overall, I was pretty happy with the design of this. Kind of the back casing prevents it from slipping out of your hand very easily, so little touches there. Like I said, it's a 720p display. It would be nice on such a large screen for it to be 1080p. But I would say, having said that, it really didn't bother me that much. Looking close, you can kind of detect the pixels, and maybe our eyes are getting used to not seeing those, so maybe it'll stand out. But I think it's kind of a trade-off, right? You get the lower cost, you still get a large screen, and it's still HD. It's just not the full 1080p. I thought it was a good trade-off. The camera. So camera performance, this is definitely one of the differentiators here. They built in a lot of kind of extra features here. One is the Grouphy, which if you're on the front-facing mode, there we go. Oh, this is pretty cool. So when you're doing a front-facing picture, it gives you this little preview up there, right? This is for your selfie. So if I'm looking at myself, let's see here. If I'm looking at myself and I'm taking a picture, I look up there, the camera's right there. So if I'm looking up at that preview to frame myself and then the picture's taken, the image actually looks like I'm looking at the camera. Thought that was a neat little touch. They have little software features in the camera along those lines. There's also, like I said, the Grouphy, which essentially is like a wide angle selfie. It's Grouphy because you can fit a bunch of people in. So you take your picture, which I'll do right now, and then it asks you to move it to the side, where it takes another picture and then another one. It's like a modified panorama, but for taking extra wide shot selfies, I suppose. And there we go, super widescreen selfie. Other features about the camera, let's see here. We've got, you know, your standard ones, panorama, HDR, sound and shot, which is you take a picture and then add 10 seconds worth of audio to it, which I wouldn't find incredibly helpful. Overall, 13 megapixels is great, and I'd say the quality of the shots in daytime were actually pretty great. Nice level of detail. If I really zoom into the pixels, I felt like I saw a lot more than I see with other camera phones. But ultimately, low light performance, maybe not the best in the world. You know, you have to figure, again, they're cutting corners in some way. The camera's kind of mid-range as far as that's concerned. Now let's talk a little bit about the performance. Now, obviously it's running the Snapdragon 400, so that's definitely a corner that they cut a little bit to bring the price down. You don't really notice it in the UI. The UI is pretty fluid. As well as a lot of the apps, web browsing, things like that, I didn't have any noticeable degradation in. Where I did notice a little bit of a difference was in the running of games, particularly Riptide GP2. There were points of the game where I'd hit a turbo and you'd expect those polygons to kind of increase in order to render everything a little bit faster, and it would kind of stutter and get a little bit choppy. So I think you start to see kind of the downside of the fact that it's running a lower system on a chip like the Snapdragon 400. Now, as for the software, it's called Emotion UI, and kind of mimics the iOS layout in that there is no app drawer, right? It's all done horizontally. I find it to be a little messy, so you have to be a little organized when you install apps and moving them and creating folders and, you know, organizing them so that it isn't just a wall of all of these apps and you're always hunting and pecking to find them. So keep that in mind. I wasn't a big fan of that part of the UI. They have a few different home screen configurations. So if you are a first-time smartphone owner and you want a more simple interface, you can select simple, and it kind of breaks it down to the main categories to make it easier for you to kind of transition to the smartphone world and also make things a lot larger. But the battery is so good in this device that you might never really need to touch those. I made it through an entire weekend without charging the device. That's how good the battery is. It literally charged for almost 3 days straight. Settings to determine which apps can use Wi-Fi and mobile data. So you can actually say, Netflix, never use it if I'm on mobile antenna, but yes, use it on a Wi-Fi connection. That's pretty cool and good for saving battery. And then other kind of flares like Wow, which is Windows on Windows. It's like a floating browser or a floating window on top of all of your other apps, so that you can multitask better. All right, so let's get to the pros of the Huawei Ascend Mate2 4G LTE. First of all, the battery, it's top notch. Honestly, I've never had a phone with as good a battery stock as this one has. So if battery is your highest priority, this is the phone to get. Value, $300, almost $300 for all of this, the screen real estate and battery, I think is a great price. LTE, it's super fast connectivity, and the design, I actually quite like the design, even though it is a little large. I'm a large person, so it worked for me. And the cons, performance kind of broke down in certain places, but that's to be expected with the Snapdragon 400. The Emotion UI is not my favorite overlay in the world. You could always just install a third-party launcher on there to get rid of a lot of those complaints. And then launching with Jelly Bean, and Huawei doesn't really have a specific idea as far as when KitKat is going to roll out, and who knows, any versions beyond that. So do keep that in mind. You're going to be back out of date right out of the gate. Now, what's my recommendation for the Huawei Ascend Mate2 4G LTE? I recommend it as a buy. It's pretty hard to maximize value here. $299 for a lot of features that people find really important. Yes, it is big. It's a phablet, but because of that, you get a huge battery on the back, and if your priority is making it through a single day without ever having to think about being worried even about plugging it in to charge it up, then this is the device for you, let alone multiple days. So it's really, really impressive. That is it for my review. I'm Jason Howell, and thank you for watching my review of the Huawei Ascend Mate2 4G LTE.